the story of the woman taken in adultery, you might remember there's a crowd gathered and they bring to Jesus a woman said she was caught in adultery. Aren't we supposed to stone her? And then Jesus says nothing, but he draws in the sand. We're not sure what he said, but gradually, and then he says, let the person who is without sin, in King James Version, let the person who is without sin cast the first stone. Okay, those of you that never done anything wrong, you go ahead, you do it first. And the crowd slowly goes away. And Jesus says to the woman, go and sin no more. Two things, so he's forgiving, but he also calls it a sin. Doesn't say it's okay. And now China has changed that. So Jesus has her punished at the end because they thought the original story encouraged lawlessness. Then China is also using religious prisoners for body parts. They have, for transplants, you want a kidney or an eye or something of this kind. Prisoners in labor camps, particularly Uyghurs, they usually check with Falun Gong as well, and some Christians, they do a medical checkup for you. So if someone needs a particular organ, they already know whether you're compatible.
That's terrible.
There's, people are going to China or surrounding countries because if there's a queue for organ transplants, you can't get them here. Kick up enough money and China will do it for you. So that's bad. Afghanistan, any Afghan who is discovered to be a Christian will be killed by the Taliban because the assumption is that all Afghans were Muslim. Therefore, if you say you're a Christian, you're an apostate from Islam, and the punishment for that is death. So when the U.S. did a rapid retreat from Afghanistan, all sorts of people were trying to get out, people who'd worked with the U.S. military and translators and people who we dumped back there. But also the Christians were seeking to flee. If they were discovered, they would be killed. So there were relief flights of Christians coming out of Pakistan, highly repressive. It has a blasphemy law. Well, it has 3 blasphemy laws. And anybody can be accused of blasphemy. But religious minorities are in greater danger because if a Muslim accuses, say, a Christian of blasphemy and it goes to an Islamic court, the testimony of the Muslim is worth more than the testimony of the Christian. So if it's he said versus he said, and you're a Christian, you just lost. And the blasphemy laws carry the death penalty, though the biggest danger for you is not the government, but if you're accused of blasphemy, a mob will kill you. So those are some of the bad places. We haven't really touched on Africa, but dealing with radical Islam throughout West Africa, we've heard about this with the coups in various countries. But there are massacres of Christians taking place by ISIS in West Africa, particularly Nigeria, now also East Africa, as going down the coast as far as Mozambique, almost to South Africa. And you have had, picking these words advisedly, in Nigeria, you have had thousands of Christians killed by radical Islamist groups in recent years, maybe up to 20,000. This is a thing which is hardly ever reported, and our own State Department downplays it.
Are there dominoes in this, where certain nations, if they keep going the way they're going with persecuting Christians, that you think it'll all of a sudden other nations will ramp it up big time? Or is it like a slowly simmering pot? Like, how do you see all worldwide activity in regards to Christians progressing over the next?
I would say slowly simmering. I mentioned at the beginning, this isn't just, one assault. There's not like one big, worldwide plot, let's go for Christians and others. There are these different trends, but they are worsening because religion's getting more mobilized. In fact, if I can give a sort of thought example, Indonesia is a country which I work in a lot. It's the world's largest Muslim country, and by and large, it's a pretty open and tolerant place. But imagine 150, 200 years ago, you were a Muslim villager in Java. There were no roads then. There would be paths through the jungle, and people would use carts and things like that. But you didn't worry about where you'd live because you're going to live there. That's where your family. You wouldn't worry about what you were going to do. You were going to be a peasant because that's all there was there. You wouldn't worry about what religion you were because everybody you knew was a Muslim. These things were not choices you made in life. Those are things that you just inherited. You were born into a world and things were unchanneled. So at many levels, it could be quite relaxed. But then you get what we're calling slowly modernity or globalization or whatever term we want to use. And that might first appear that you get increased roads, so you start to see different people coming through your village. They may be of different religions. So if you're Muslim, suddenly aware of Christians. Then there may be magazines or newspapers. And then someone in the village gets a radio and you're learning about things elsewhere. Then you get a TV and then you get the internet. And suddenly all these choices are there. Well, maybe you could go to a town and study, go to university, get a different job, different ideas, live somewhere else, have a different religion. So what before was just assumed, you were born into it, now can be questioned. So that means that religious groups all over the world now have to become more assertive. Beforehand, you were just sort of, that's the way the world was, and you just accepted it. Now it's challenged. There are all sorts of challenges and differences and people questioning things, so you've got to push back. So religions are now more assertive than they were 100 years, 200 years ago. And that's across the board. Secularists are more assertive too. One aspect of that is militancy. Just because you're assertive, it doesn't mean you're going to have to be violent and repress other people. It just means you're going to sort of push back. But it does tend to lead to increased militancy and then denial of religious freedom to others. So a lot of this is to do with what we call globalization, or whatever term we want to use.